Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Global Ethics Summit. My name is Jonathan Whitaker, and I lead sales and account management and client engagement for Ethisphere. So if not had a chance to meet you personally, look forward to doing so here with the remainder of the day and into the future. So yesterday was just a phenomenal day. Starting off with Sam Palmisano here at the front stage, sharing stories and thoughts and strategies and the importance of companies connecting around cyber strategy, cyber security, cyber due diligence, and companies collectively raising their standards and practices around those key topics. Of course, we continued through the day, conversations around artificial intelligence, diversity and inclusion, and hosted a series of roundtables that I've heard feedback from some of the participants that were just fantastic. So please welcome that. We welcome that feedback. As we put together our faculty and put together our agendas, we intentionally try to create opportunities for both thought leadership, strategy, insight from a high level, and then couple that and balance that with more tactical takeaways. So hopefully in your eyes we're accomplishing that. Again, we welcome your feedback. This is a collaborative process. As we look to build our future agendas and future events, we want this to be, we want your insight and your participation because you're our customer, you're our partner in these events, and you are our community, and we want this to be valuable for you in the future. And as important as that conversation is up here, it's just as valuable or perhaps more valuable out there. So the connections that you make here today and yesterday, we want those to last and continue that community and build that community. So if you've been sitting with your colleagues from your own company for the last day or so, then I encourage you to reach out and at the next sessions visit with someone new, take away 3 to 5 new relationships that extend beyond today. If you meet somebody that you lose their business card on the way home, reach out to us. We'll be happy to reconnect you. The idea is to continue to share with one another and collaborate into the future. So we ended last night with just a great dinner at the Yale Club. I think we had 225 attendees for the Bella dinner. And those of you who were with us yesterday from 8 a.m. in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, marathon day. So I applaud your endurance. And we've got just a great agenda lined up for today as we conclude just after lunchtime. So we'll look at today's agenda just a few moments, and I'll introduce our first session. But before doing so, I'd like to make an announcement that we at Ethisphere are just super excited about, and we talked about it just briefly last night at the Bella dinner as well. So you'll see press releases going out this morning. We'll post it on our website, and as the kids like to say, you'll see it on the socials, so in LinkedIn and Twitter. But so we at Ethisphere are just super excited and honored to announce that the fine people at Create Compliance will be joining our family. And if you're not familiar with Create, Pamela Passman started the business about 5 years ago. She's been a longtime friend of our organization, has served on our board, and she had worked at Microsoft for about 15 years leading some of the regulatory compliance for their online and cloud-based solutions. So she has a deep expertise around cybersecurity and cyber readiness, and her team also has just tremendous amount of experience around anti-corruption, anti-bribery initiatives, trade protection, and IP protection. So they have built a platform which helps companies assess and align their compliance programs against standards. And in the philosophy that there is no competition when it comes to integrity, ethics, and compliance, they provide a tremendous amount of benchmarking capabilities in helping companies collaborate to raise the standards and measure their programs and the maturity of their programs. So please look for more information about that coming your way soon. We'll do a webinar in April and give you a look at their solutions. But suffice it to say, we're super proud, very excited to welcome them as new colleagues to Ethisphere. So without further ado, let's get moving on to our first session of the day, focused on developing a cohesive and leadership-driven compliance strategy. We'll have the panelists introduce themselves. But as you see in the agenda, we'll have the pleasure of hearing from Jay Jorgensen, Laura Kennedy, Diana Sands, and Kim Yapchi. Our session will be moderated by Susan Divers. Susan has 30 years of experience in the legal and compliance space and served as Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at AECOM. where they were recognized as the world's most ethical company several times. She now serves as senior advisor at LRN, where she advises companies on ethics and compliance programs, communication, and training strategies. So please join me in welcoming our friends to the stage.
Well, thanks very much, and it's always a pleasure to be at Ethisphere. I think this is my 10th conference, and we were just talking informally, and you always learn a lot. So that's our goal here, and our goal is to keep it lively, engaged, no talking heads, and to welcome questions from the audience too. So we're going to go around and just briefly introduce ourselves. Laura, you want to start off?
Yeah, hi, Laura Kennedy, Senior Vice President of Ethics, Compliance, and Risk Management at Emergent BioSolutions, which is a $800 million biotech firm specializing in pharmaceuticals for public health threats.
Hi, I'm Kim Yupchai. I just joined Tenneco Automotive. It's an $8 billion company with 30,000 employees in over 70 countries. Our auto parts are in probably most of your cars. You'll know us as Monroe shocks and struts, and we also do clean air catalytic converters and elastomers.
I'm Jay Jorgensen. I'm the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Walmart. I love cars.
Thank you.
Thank you for that stuff. We have 2.4 million employees in 28 countries.
And I'm Diana Sands. I lead our Office of Internal Governance and Administration at the Boeing Company, a company of about $100 billion in sales, about 140,000 employees with 3 major lines of business: commercial, airplanes, defense, space, and security, and global services.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So let me introduce and frame the topic and also key up a couple of slides, just 2, I promise, to help do that. A year ago, the Department of Justice, it was actually Hui Chen, who was a panelist yesterday, put out criteria, which were really questions that prosecutors ask about ethics and compliance programs when you have to go in and explain why Jim in Cambodia paid a bribe or whatever. And they were very insightful in terms of the shift that I think the whole industry is going through. And that shift, at least in my mind, is a shift away from the sort of simple program element inventory where everybody who's an ethics and compliance officer says, oh great, I've got a code, I've got a dashboard, I do some data analytics, I've got training, my CEO talks about ethics here and there, I'm good to go. And then, of course, you have Wells Fargo, you have Volkswagen, and they had all of that, but it didn't really operationalize in practice. And so when I read the criteria, I said, this is really about a shift away from what does your program look like to what does your program actually do. And this year, we put out our annual program impact assessment, and we shifted it pretty radically away from inventories and more towards what kinds of behavior do you see in your workforce. And then we did an overlay where we took the DOJ criteria and tried to boil it down to its essence. And then we looked at how the programs performed on that. And we saw some really interesting things. And again, we're looking at it from the lens of what does your program do, not so much what does your program look like. And we saw, I'm actually going to stand, it's just much easier. We saw that programs that really operationalized their compliance did much better. And what I mean by that, we're going to talk about that today, is programs that actually impact behavior that aren't just sort of limited to the legal department or the E&C department. We saw the programs that look at the root cause of misconduct rather than simply dealing with it do better, because that can be a very grueling internal conversation. We saw that embracing accountability and transparency, even if it means doing that for really senior or highly successful people, was important. And we saw that everyone has to play in the compliance game. It can't be something that the legal department or the compliance staff does. And then we saw that continuous efforts to really live the values and infuse those in everything you do were critically important. And I'm going to turn it over to the panel in a minute, but leave this slide up because I think this is one of the most interesting slides in our report, which is on our website, and there's a link to it. But it's also one of the most disturbing because we ask the question, how often or how regularly does your E&C program actually impact business decisions? And you know, a simple way to think about that is if you do due diligence on third parties, how many get rejected? You can do the due diligence, but if you don't reject people, do you really have a program? So we saw that high-performing programs that really focused on values do it better. But what's so interesting here is not everybody, even high-performing programs, don't really impact business decisions perhaps as often as they should. So with that slightly sobering note, I'm going to ask the panel members basically to talk about, first, in short bites, how you operationalize compliance in your program, how you do that. Laura.
Okay. Well, one of the central questions that I think most of us grapple with is how do you drive good behavior? How do you motivate employees to want to do the right thing and to avoid doing bad things, lying, cheating, stealing, all these things that could get the company
Don't forget sexual
into
harassment.
trouble. Yeah, sexual harassment. All the things that we have to deal with that could get the company into trouble. And I think, you know, there's many ways to do this, and many of them involve cultivating an ethical culture. But I want to talk about one other different type of tool that you could use, and this is actually a very powerful tool. It's powerful because employers control it, employees care about it, and actually it really grabs them where it counts, and that is their compensation. We started a system just in the last year where our compensation is based on a performance evaluation system that weights equally behaviors as it does goals, achieving goals. And this slide shows that we place 50% of the score of the rating, which determines your compensation, on goals. What are your goals? Refresh your ethics and compliance program, do a risk assessment, whatever your goals are for that year. That gets 50, if you achieve those goals, that's 50% of your rating. And your other 50% is behaviors. That is, did you achieve those goals in accordance with behaviors that are consistent with our core values and our competencies and things we really want to encourage and nurture. And that's our core values happen to be respect, commitment, communication, empowerment, innovation, and we actually measure them. It's, you know, it's quite controversial to do this because it can be subjective, and we've had lots of discussions with other companies, and they don't do it because it's subjective, and if manager wants to get rid of an employee, doesn't really like them, but they're doing a good job, but there's bad blood there. You know, there's a lot of subjectivity in that, but we take there's a lot of work behind doing this. We have like 10 pages of guidance on each one of these things of what do these core values look like? What does it mean in action, in practice? What do you look for? How can you encourage it? That kind of thing. And there's workshops to help managers actually do scenarios and role play. So if you do this, if you do commit to rating behaviors, which is one way to encourage the kind of behaviors you're going to get, you do have to do a lot of work around it to make sure that it's done right and not arbitrarily and not abuse it.
So you really put a lot of effort into it.
We put a lot of effort in guidance and workshops and that kind of thing, but it's really interesting because it has stimulated a lot of discussion about the importance of behaviors and not just achieving your goals blindly. I mean, the problem with Wells Fargo is that all they cared about is achieving goals. Achieving your goals, exceeding your goals, it led to cheating.
Right.
If the company only cares about do your goals anyway, it doesn't matter how, That's it. But we measure, the goals, what you're going to achieve and how you're going to achieve it, and how is as important as what.
Great. Kim?
Yeah. So before I comment, I'm just curious, can we see by a show of hands how many of you have some sort of values rating in your compensation performance process? See, excellent. I think that's much higher than in the
Good,
past.
right.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't, the next time you interview for a job, you might want to ask that question, right? Because it really shows you, number one, how, I think, committed and how sophisticated their program is. And if they don't have it, you have that opportunity to plant the seed and see what the reaction is. If they're like, oh, no, never, why would we ever do that? You'll at least know what you're getting into, right? So I'll pick another example. For me, when we operationalize, right, it means compliance in the business are seamless. People aren't picking their head up and thinking, oh, I've got to go do this compliance thing over here. It's together. And what I really emphasize to the leaders is when you say hit your goals, for some reason, people just by default say by any means possible, right? And if it's just me over here saying, yes, but you have to do it the right way, they see it as a dichotomy, right? And we want it to be one seamless message. And for you as a leader, I want to protect you, right, and put you in the best situation so if some rogue employee goes off and do something, you could say, nope, I said it, I told them, hit your goal, but do it the right way. So you can engage the leader in that way. And then we try to embed what we're doing right into whatever process it is, right? So if you're talking third-party due diligence, put it right into your vendor or your customer onboarding process. If there's a meeting going on, a sales meeting, a leadership meeting, you're just part of the agenda. It's not, okay, and then compliance speaks, right? The leader should be part of it. They should, again, the employees should see the leader giving the message. It's way more powerful if my VP or CEO stands up and delivers information than if it's just me. I mean, I'm a good presenter, but they're the boss, right? It means more to an employee. So making it easy for those leaders, and we talked about earlier, one really easy thing, it's not a lot of work for you to do, videotape them. Ask them to tell you a story about a time when they spoke up and felt valued, or someone spoke up to them and they valued it. It puts them on record for walking the talk, right? And then that leader can use it in their region for their onboarding. Really, really easy to do.
Great. Jay?
One idea I wanted to recommend in terms of operationalizing ethics and compliance is something that we started doing about 5 years ago. It's really worked well for us, and it's that our board every year comes up, or we suggest to them, the ethics and compliance program suggests to them, and then they take several objectives, the things that need to be done in the company in terms of ethics and compliance over the course of the year. They make them as goals, and then they assign them to the senior leaders and tie their incentive compensation to it. So if, like, for example, if you didn't have a values-based component in your evaluations, installing that might be the goal for the year, and the board assigns that to the head of the HR and to the CEO, and then ties their compensation to getting it done. And then at the end of the year, we report out throughout the year, we measure how the goals are going, and then at the end of the year, there's a formal board meeting where we report and show all the metrics on whether or not the goals have been accomplished, and then the compensation committee, in their normal voting of the giving of incentive compensation to the senior managers, they vote whether or not those goals were met and whether or not to award the incentive compensation. It really focuses people's attention.
I bet.
That's great.
There was
Coming from
we
the
were on like
board.
our second year, and one of our segment CEOs, his goal was off. And so we sent out the reports, to the board and to all the senior leaders of like, here's how all the goals are going. And I swear within 5 minutes he was in my office wanting to talk about like, why is this red? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
And we got that back on track.
That's really a great example of operationalizing, and that tracks with our research too, that if the board takes it as a priority and attaches real consequences and meat to it, then the C-suite pays attention.
Yeah.
Diana.
You know, it's hard to follow those examples, so I might touch on something just so not to repeat in terms of structure. Because this field, this function, I think has more structures, and I'm talking organizational and operational structures, than any other function I've seen. And I bet we don't have any two that are exactly like sitting in this room, which suggests that there are actually a lot of models that work. But I think a couple of tenets are important to see, and one is around ensuring the structure has business alignment, and the other is around good functional kind of collaboration and integration in the work. So for us, for example, just a couple of examples, we have an ethics organization that is hardlined into my group, and their charge is to advance the culture of the company as well as do ethics case management. Investigations also sits in this group. They are also, though, aligned, if you will, with business teams. So, for example, each of our business leaders has his or her leadership team that includes business leaders, it includes functional leaders, and one of those functional leaders is an ethics leader. So that entire leadership team is charged to advance the business outcomes and objectives, but do so with the right functional headsets, all of the functional headsets. So to the point of every single leader in that team is looking to advance the business outcomes in the right way, you know, with the right financial outcomes, with the right leadership teams, et cetera. In compliance, in the area of compliance, our philosophy is that each respective leader in the company owns the compliance related to their area. So financial compliance owned by finance, EEO compliance owned by HR, et cetera. But we bring those areas together, the senior leaders of all the compliance areas, in a compliance risk management board. So this is more of a matrixed structure that I chair. And we are collectively charged with ensuring effective compliance risk management across the company. And this group also includes business leaders. Mostly the CFOs of the businesses sit on this board. In terms of appropriate, I'd say, functional integration in the work, a couple of examples there. And this is more around operational structure that we have. So investigations and corrective actions. Investigations, we have an operational structure that ensures a tight working relationship between key leaders, especially I'd say in the more sensitive areas. So law, my group, ethics, HR, to know whether a law should take a lead on an investigation, and we only have law take a lead about 33% of our investigations, whether we do it or if it's EEO related, HR may do it. And then if there's a substantiated outcome, we also have that group along with the manager determine the appropriate corrective actions so that the right outcomes really do come out of any issues with behavior. So those are just a few examples. So again, many different structures can work. I think ensuring the clear hard line, dotted line to have both that business alignment, integration across functions, and then when you think about the people in the group, what we look for, given all that, is not only expertise in the functional area or the ethics, if you will, expertise, but also business acumen and people who can work well with others.
Well, those are all excellent examples of actually operationalizing rather than just focusing on having a program and perfecting it. Let's open it up to see if there's a few questions, and then we're going to move on to talk about what some of the challenges are that you've had to overcome to get there. So, questions for the panel?
Yeah, so when you're using that executive scorecard and you're giving someone a red, what type of actual data are you pulling into the scorecard that would allow that to be objective?
That's for me. Yes. Okay, yeah. So I think it's so important when you operationalize to have a goal that can be measured. Not just, do good or like drive awareness. It has to be measurable. So, for example, if the goal in our hypothetical, for those of you who don't have a values-based component of people's annual reviews, if the goal the board set was implement that, then when we set the goal, we lay out a plan. Like, quarter one, I'm making this up as I sit here, but it's an example. Quarter one, create a plan. Quarter two, present the plan to the CEO's council. Quarter three, implement the plan. Quarter four, all evaluations to actually go live. And so then you have something to measure quarter by quarter to say back to them, you're on track or you're off track to make your end of your goal. Because of course, the thing I think that would be worst for your program and worst for you personally is if you surprise somebody. If you set your very senior leaders a goal that's tied to their compensation, and they think it's going well, they think it's going well, and then it's red and they lose their compensation, that's not going to be a great experience. You want to, have the ability for them to know and to see what's coming.
And I think you make a great point, Jay. You don't want to have a goal that just says, okay, increase your engagement metric by 5, right? It has to be really specific. Well, how are you going to do that? What are you going to actually do? What's the plan to do it? Who's the leads, right? All of those details, because you know that a culture just doesn't grow itself or grow in the right way on its own, right? You have to actively, physically do things differently.
Great. Maybe one more question, and then we'll move on to challenges. Anybody? Okay. So let's talk about some of the challenges in operationalizing, because what you're really talking about, as everybody has said on the panel, is putting ethics and compliance into every aspect of the company. And to give you an example that I heard this year, which I thought was the best example I've ever come across, a major pharma company noticed that a lot of the gift and entertainment violations were occurring when their sales reps went to visit with doctors, actually in Asia. And they, in fact, had a major enforcement in that area. So they decided that rather than just layer on more rules, more procedures, do more training, they would actually address the behavioral aspects of that. And they said, you're going to have your meetings on Skype. And it was interesting because you can't give a gift on Skype, or at least very easily. And the incidents, and they were able to track it, the incidents of noncompliance went down dramatically. And that was a real lesson for the company. And I think it's a great example of actually implementing something that impacts behavior. But of course, there was a lot of resistance to that. So let's talk about challenges and how you've overcome them. Laura, I'm sure you've had some.
Thankfully, my company does not do business with China or Russia. If they did,
You are
that
so
would be my
lucky.
challenge, because I've
Right.
been there, done that. Used to
Yeah.
work for Honeywell and SAIC, so I've had a lot of experience there, but now, in this company, we're not there, at least not yet. We are in other companies. But, I think the overall challenge for me is I'm constantly trying to find new ways to engage employees and embed it in the business and in the hearts and the minds of the employees and their interactions in and out of the inside and outside of the company. They're, making it become part of the DNA of the company of how we think, and it's embedded in all the decision making is really a key thing that we're just constantly dealing with. And I think that, as Kim said, one thing that we have done is getting the business people involved every step of the way, the managers. And we just did I think a great opportunity is just your annual ethics training. And we developed a totally homegrown, customized video that features just our leaders and employees talking about our core values and culture and key risk areas. And we do supplement it with compliance trainings, that's in-depth training on sort of rules and risk-based. But the annual ethics training is values-based, and it's all the company's leaders and employees talking about core values and how they work in practice. And that's sort of the content, but the delivery is also through managers. Managers are the ones who show this video to their teams and small teams, and they introduce it and say, this is really important to me. Ethics is really important to me. This is not coming from Ivory Tower Ethics and Compliance Office. It's coming from their boss. And if ethics is important to the boss, it's important to their employees. I mean, it's just, there's so many surveys and research that show that. And I think it has to come from the managers down. And so they are responsible for introducing the video, showing it, and then having a little discussion afterwards. And we join them in this. I mean, we support that. But we really want it to come from the voice and the face and the heart of the managers, because that's where it has impact. That's how it has impact. And I think ethics training is a huge opportunity to get to just embedding it into people and engaging people. If it's just online, electronic, impersonal training, it's just really not gonna have impact
Great.
the way other things do.
Kim?
One of the challenges that I face are salespeople. How many of you have salespeople in your organization? I'm going to assume the most, right? Antitrust law is counterintuitive to salespeople, right? They want to kill the competition. They want to dominate. They want it, right? That's in their blood. And when they go to trade associations, as we know, it's a dangerous environment. They're at the bar, they're meeting old friends and talking. So one of the things that we did was implement a new process where there had to be approval before attendance of any trade association event. And what it did, it actually saved us money, because we found there was a lot of people attending things they really didn't need to attend. And in the process, those people, if they went, it was business justified. They were coached and counseled and got special training to understand the dangerous element that they're in and to how to act if inappropriate conversations occurred, what to do immediately, and who to contact. So that's something really simple that you can do. Obviously, your business people need to be aligned to it, but they were tired of antitrust issues, hitting us left and right. And so that process stopped it and ended it all and saved us money in the process.
That's a good solution.
Yeah.
Jay?
One of the, I think, difficulties in operationalizing that we've experienced is the human nature to want to share good news and the human nature to want to hear good news. So, I think that's just a common thing. So we got this idea actually from our colleagues at Ford. I don't know if there's anybody here from Ford, but they began doing a time in the senior executive meetings when you could only share bad news, where you were expected to go around the room and everyone was expected to say, like, the worst thing that was going on.
So there'd be a Debbie Downer?
Exactly right, exactly right.
Airing of grievances.
Exactly, it was like, we're missing this target, we had this huge safety problem, just around the room. So we haven't taken it that far. We don't make everybody do it, but we have an ethics and compliance committee of our CEO and all of his direct reports. And it's 10 times a year. And there is a part of that period that is dedicated to bad news, where people go around and say, this is what's not going well. And I think it's been helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's very healthy.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Diana?
No, I think one of the things, we have not figured this out yet, but one of our challenges, I'd say opportunities we're dealing with right now is what I'm going to call streamlining or right-sizing compliance. We're a company who's been around for over 100 years. We're highly regulated, and over those years, we have built layers of processes and controls, and all with good intention. And in some cases, when something happened, an issue, we've added more process and control. And so our dialogue has been around, how do we look at this and truly understand and assess the risks and how best to mitigate them in the most efficient and effective way that is embedded into the business processes. And we're going about this by looking at our, I hate to say, but thousands that we have of procedures, policies, and business process instructions and frankly, that I don't think employees fully understand anyway when they look at them. And so we're also talking about, what's the balance of rules versus enabling judgments? These are hard conversations for our compliance leaders. They really are. It's easier, it's more comfortable just to layer more process and control in the system. And this is what we are. It's a big opportunity for us. It's a big effort. We're just starting it. So we'll let you know how it goes. But I think it's absolutely necessary for us as our business, and I think all of our businesses are becoming much more competitive, as we as a company are trying to transform ourselves into, a more agile company that can compete in the future. We also have to do that. And so that is what we've been doing a lot of discussions around.
It's interesting, our research that we just published yesterday shows that there's actually an inverse relationship between an over-reliance on rules and procedures. We call it coral reef syndrome, where you just keep piling them on and piling them on, and having a really effective operationalized program. Because if you have an operationalized effective program, you're really empowering values and judgment and ownership. It's not sort of just, saying go read SOX or Dodd-Frank. It's a much more dynamic, business-friendly approach, so you're on the right track.
Yeah, and I would say, Susan, much of our program is very operationalized. It's just the infrastructure behind it is very bureaucratic, if you will. It's cumbersome, and it's too much, and that's what we have to kind of streamline and simplify.
Good. Well, we're going to open it up in a minute for questions, but I think I'll start out with the first question, which is one of the things I hear everybody say in one way or another is that you really involve a lot of other corporate functions. I mean, that's clearly the basis of operationalizing. But in looking at misconduct, in my experience, that was always one of the hardest things in the company. And certainly the sexual harassment scandals show that it's one of the hardest things in companies. You can have policies, you can have procedures, you can have investigations, but how in the end do you resolve misconduct allegations? And they can be a great opportunity to really show that you're walking the walk as well as talking the talk. So I'm going to ask everybody to briefly address that and then open it up for questions because we've got some time.
Yeah, this is a hugely important issue, I think. And, we spend a lot of time, we have a pretty systematic way of approaching it. We have every concern that comes in we classify as in one of 4 levels, depending on the level of risk it creates for the company and whether it needs a fact-finding investigation. And sort of level 3 is an allegation of, potential violation of policy, law, and regulation, and that needs a full-blown investigation. And to me, you can do a fact-finding investigation, but the beginning and the end of that are the most important pieces of investigation. The beginning is who's going to investigate, and I think you just can't throw any warm body investigation. We have 3 criteria, and no one can investigate unless they satisfy this criteria, and that is they've got to be obviously independent and objective. They can't know anyone involved. They've got to be apart from it. They've got to be a subject matter expert in the basis of the allegations. If it's harassment, it's got to be HR. They've got to know what questions to ask and how to weigh the information. And the third is they have to be trained in investigations. And we do this full-day training across many people in different functions. But I think it's key because I've seen a lot of investigations where the investigator just misses the issues or they're too tight, they have vested interest in the outcome, and you're not going to get a reliable outcome if you don't get the right investigator. So then if you get a good investigator, you do a fact-finding, and then the end point is really important. What happens if you substantiate the allegations or if you don't? And if you do, you really need a good root cause analysis. What caused this wrongdoing? Was it individual wrongdoing or was it organizational? Because I've seen a lot of issues where an individual does mischarging or whatever. We're a government contractor, so mischarging is a big issue for us. And if there's mischarging, the knee-jerk reaction is just, fire the employee. But not so fast. It may not solve the problem. The problem may be larger than that. It may be the manager is sending these mixed signals of
unreasonable,
just make your targets no matter what or whatever. And so you can fire that employee, but the problem is going to continue. So you got to get the root cause right. And so we do this whole elaborate root cause of, is it individual wrongdoing, intentional or negligent, and organization? Is it, inadequate policy or inadequate training or bad manager or lack of internal controls or whatever? But we have to come up with the right root cause, and we spend a lot of time getting that right. And then that determines the corrective actions that are necessary and the disciplinary actions. If it's individual wrongdoing, you need some disciplinary action. But if it's really something with the organization, policy, training, something there, you need corrective action. So anyway, the beginning and the end of that process is really important to us.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can add to that. The only other thing I'd suggest is I try to emphasize that it's the business people's decision of whether to fire or, it's their employee. They are the manager. And in some companies I've worked with, they said, well, what's compliance going to do? I'm going to coach and counsel you, and I think if you're not taking enough action, we're going to talk more or probably escalate it. But it's still your decision. You have to own it. You're accountable for that employee. If you decide to keep the employee, you're sticking your neck out. It's not, oh, well, compliance said it's okay.
I might just offer an additional point to that, maybe slightly counter, but consistent, in that I think it is important, though, and maybe it's, especially at a company as large as ours, to have some consistency.
Yes.
In the corrective action, which is why I mentioned for us, one of the operational frameworks we have is that, especially for like all executive corrective actions, we bring the manager as part of the conversation, but we also have a senior HR ethics and law person as part of that. And that helps drive the consistency of the different types of violations in terms of corrective action across the company. And the only other thing I would add is that we also have a way to communicate to our employees that corrective actions do occur when there is wrongdoing. We do that by protecting identities, but I think some of you may have heard, and many of us have this, where we issue biweekly ethics reports in our internal news, and they describe certain ethical situations, ethical dilemmas, what the situation was, and what the outcome was as well. And so this is a way of showing our employees that there is organizational justice in the company.
I'm glad to hear you say that last part because, Walmart is enormous. We had $500 billion in sales last year, so 2.4 million employees. So the consistency point, I think we have gotten right. The way that it works for us is the manager actually cannot decide what to do when an associate has a substantiated violation, because across 2.4 million employees, it's just all over the map. Like if 10 people do the same thing, they might get everything from nothing to termination. So we don't allow that. We say, based on what has happened in the company in the past, out of our database, here's the kind of punishment or corrective action or coaching that needs to happen, and that's what happens to drive consistency. But this idea, where we could do better, where we could do more, is this idea of sharing. We're a company from a small town. Respecting others is a huge part of our culture. And I think the idea of we're going to say what happened. We're going to say that this happened to this person and this was the result. That's something that maybe we could do more. I think it would be good because it lets people know that there is organizational justice and also serves perhaps as a fair warning of
exactly. It's
what's
exactly
gonna
what it does.
happen.
Maybe just bridging what the three of us said, because I think it's important. I agree with what all of us said, because at the end of the day, the manager is the one who usually delivers the corrective action.
That's right, for us too.
In the same
And
thing,
so,
like we
and
make
so
sure.
having that manager bought in
Yeah.
is important. So I think it's, you can take something from what all three of us said.
Great.
Great. Well, let's open it up for questions. In the back?
Yeah, I am very interested in learning a little bit from the panelists. What is the compliance officer in their company's relationship to the board of directors?
I think most of us have direct line into the board of directors. So by charter, I actually report directly to the CEO from an organizational standpoint, and I have direct line to the audit committee chair of our board as well.
Yep.
So I'm required to sit in the meetings. I'm required to report certain, periodically throughout the year. I have access to him directly, and he has access to me directly as well.
Very similar. Again, because Walmart's so large, we're a little bit unusual in that I report to the corporate secretary just to deal with our size, but also to the audit committee and the audit committee chair. And one idea I got from one of these sessions, which we've now implemented, which I recommend to you, is that the audit committee has a formal policy that the chief ethics and compliance officer can't be hired or fired or their compensation materially changed without the vote of the audit committee.
Yeah, and that relationship is really important. And frankly, in the interview process for my current job, I actually reached out to one of the members on the audit committee because I wanted to not only get a sense of the company, I wanted to know where their head was at as well.
Yeah. Same with me. I report to the CEO and I report to the audit committee. I'm in every board meeting and in every audit committee meeting, and I present at every audit committee meeting. So I'm extremely tied in to the audit committee
And
to the
visibly.
chair.
Yeah.
The chair. And we talk, and we don't just talk during meetings, we talk in between meetings.
Good. In the back, I think? Or, no, sorry.
Yeah, there's one right there.
Oh, okay.
here.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it's hard to see with the lights.
Yeah,
There you go.
there's behind you. There's
Right behind you.
There you go.
Thank you. This is for each panelist. You've mentioned consistency in discipline and in how you handle the investigations. Is that something you actually have written guidelines that you've worked on with HR? Thanks.
We do around, we have a kind of a guiding principle document on corrective action, and we have a little bit less formal, but a kind of a structure in terms of investigations of how to determine, to your point, kind of who takes the lead and how we go about it, meaning regular check-ins with the reporting parties, how it becomes a full looped circle in terms of how we handle an investigation.
Very similar. Because we're so large, we have a group that actually assigns out the investigations. They're called the triage group, and they put them into the tiers. They assign them out with a consistent written approach, and then there's a consistent written approach to how they're closed and then how they're recorded in the system.
Yeah, I've worked in companies that haven't written and those that don't have it written. If you have a smaller company and a group, simply the alignment is what's important, right? If you're all on the same page, it's easy to execute, whether it's written or unwritten.
Yeah. And we have a pretty defined, clear written process with templates and everything. But, at the end about consistency of disciplinary action, I think that's a really key issue. We probably don't have as detailed guidelines as you do. We have sort of broad categories, but we have a database of what disciplinary action we've taken for specified violations, and we consult that database. Actually, the people who determine the disciplinary action, corrective actions, we have what's called a resolution team, and it consists of HR, ethics and compliance, legal, and the manager. So there's different perspectives that are brought to bear. It's not just the manager's decision, but there's sort of an interdisciplinary team that discusses it. The manager does have a lot of weight, but it's also other voices are included in that. But the consistency of disciplinary action is a really important and difficult thing, because I think horizontal consistency, like having to do it consistent, how you impose the same disciplinary action consistently horizontally, but vertical consistency is much more challenging when a senior employee, like an SVP or an EVP, is found to have violated a company policy. And if you look at your database and you say, oh, we had a junior employee who violated did pretty much the same thing, and we fired that guy for that. But then you get an EVP doing the same thing, and then you talk to the manager, and he's the biggest business getter in the company, and we really don't want to fire him over this, right? No, we're not going to do that. So this vertical consistency, I think, is a key challenge.
That's so true. And tracking the discipline that has been given out is so empowering in that, because
Right.
then it's not just your judgment versus somebody else's. You can say, this is what
Right.
we do. This is
Yeah, I mean, consistency, the federal sentencing guidelines describes what an, effective ethics and compliance program is, and consistency of disciplinary action is one of the elements. But we got in my former company, SAIC, the board cared about this so much that on an annual basis, I had to show for that year what disciplinary action we took in each of our cases and what level employee it was to make sure there was vertical consistency in disciplinary action.
Well, that's such a key factor that I can't resist asking the other panelists to address. How do you ensure organizational justice vertically? Because in our research, if you don't, that immediately erodes trust.
Exactly.
And it shows that that you're not walking the walk fully.
Yeah, I think it's hard.
You're right.
It's hard.
It
Right?
is.
It's not something that's easy, and I think that is the benefit. If you have the written policy, right, up front, it's very easy to administer. And if they want to get an exception to that policy, it's clear who the authority is, right? So that's the ease of having the policy. When you don't have the policy, you have to have some really hard conversations, right, with people and say, okay, how are we going to defend this? This is an outlier, this is an exception. Are we comfortable with this? Do we feel it's going to affect the change that we want? Will it erode our culture, right? And a lot of times when you lead people through those questions, they come to the realization, okay, it's not going to be enough.
I think because of that, Kim, we tend to try to be harsher on our more senior leaders.
Yeah.
And we will talk, we'll talk with our employees about it. We had one in a office overseas leader several years back who was not treating employees right in that office, and it was a pretty small office. And there was an event one night, and the next day we got 3 complaints through our ethics, 3 or 4 ethics complaints through our line. And we had to, frankly, we had to take the action we took with that employee. And then afterwards, we had one of our other senior leaders talk with that office about what happened there to make sure that they understood that our values really are important and we will take actions. It is very hard to do, though. It's not easy to do because this person was a great business performer. But I think you have to kind of build that discipline and that wherewithal, and you'll build the credibility, frankly, with your workforce.
The impact's tremendous.
Yes.
I agree.
Agree.
And I totally endorse the database idea, because then when you say to your senior leaders, well, of course we don't want to give different discipline to the people at the top. They're instinctively like, oh, of course, no, we don't. And then if you have a database to show them, and then this is what we normally do here, then the conversation goes to the right place.
Right.
But what's interesting too is how you message. I mean, that is maybe one of the most difficult things you'll ever do in your career. But then how do you message that? Because if it's done correctly, then you really can build trust and really enhance the culture. When I was at one of the companies I was at before, we had to fire a senior female leader, and she was the only woman leader in this geography. And the message went out informally that we did it because she was a woman, which wasn't the case. So then we had to, basically force the head of that business to write a letter to all employees, not mentioning the dirty details, but saying we all have to respect conflict of interest policies, and we take action no matter how senior someone is. Everybody knew at that point, and we re-messaged it towards what actually happened. But I learned a lesson, which is that you have to, it's great if you take the tough actions, but how they're perceived are really critical in terms
Let me flip it around, right? Because we're talking a lot about reactive right now. What do you do once the bad thing already happened? What I like to do is do the proactive. And I call it experiential learning, right? So you want to teach them the skills and the behaviors to avoid getting in that situation. So one of the things that I've used in the past is something that we call the winning choices game. So get yourself embedded into a leadership event, a sales conference, something else, You can do it with a whole big group like this. And you take them through a fake year, right? So you'll have quarters and you'll have scenarios where there's a short description, they have 3 choices, and someone in their group is appointed as CFO, VP, whatever, and the CFO has to run to the bank with their choice to the scenario, right? And the goal of the game is to win the most profit. So we set this up so that, of course, the wrong answers pay out the best. And so they go through a couple of quarters, you show which teams are winning, and you sort of egg the lagging teams on. Come on, guys, what's wrong, right? What's happening with you? And then after a couple of quarters, you say, uh-oh, newsflash, dawn raid, some big headlines. There's some consequences to some of the decisions that have been made. Then if hopefully you have a divider in the room, we wheel the divider back to reveal a jail. The last time we did this, the last session, I literally heard the words, "Oh shit."
That's fun.
Right, now, clue number 1, the compliance team is running this, right? What do you think is gonna happen? And then the leaders of that team have to go to the jail, right?
It's a great
or
visual.
pay fines. So number 1, that leader could have stopped the decision. I don't care if the leader made it or not, right? They could have stopped that decision. Sometimes if the team really made bad choices, more than one person will go to jail. And it is so impactful, right? So that the next time they see misbehavior, the next time they see doubt, once they've had to sit in the jail, and people have said, oh my God, I sat there.
I love it.
I couldn't play. The team forgot about me. No one came to visit, right? And then all of a sudden, when you play the next 2 quarters, boom, the behavior aligns perfectly. Now, see, you've just put them through something and marked their hearts and minds, so that they go back to the business like the next day, they're going to remember that, right? They're going to remember what leadership behavior they need to display. They're going to remember what to do if they see something wrong.
That is so awesome, Kim. Can you
That's
license
great.
that? Awesome. It's a good question.
Maybe we can play here.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, any other last questions, comments? We're almost out of time. We'll give you a little bit of time.
There's
there.
one.
There's one
Oh,
back there.
yeah, I'm sorry, I can't see, so you'll have to.
Well, I apologize. This may be a long question, so feel free to put a pin in it and say no. I didn't realize we were running close. You were speaking about proactive, but also on the subject of operationalizing and kind of organizational justice. Does anyone have a kind of operationalized program around anti-retaliation? I know there are some companies that do, but
good question.
there are different ways to do it. I just didn't know if anybody up there did.
Do you want to go first?
Well, I mean, we absolutely have a very strong anti-retaliation policy that we emphasize throughout. That's part of the whole investigation process. We continually emphasize that. We make, we have folks that are part of the investigation sign documents, and we encourage folks who feel like they've been retaliated against to come report that. And we do investigations around that. And we've had actions come out of that. I will say, practically speaking, what's challenging sometimes is the subtle forms of retaliation that can be hard to really investigate and verify, right? The person doesn't include the other person in meetings as much anymore, and those are the ones that the subtle aspects are tougher, and we're still continually trying to get our arms around that. But absolutely, very strong policy that we have if you will, a process and
I
program
couldn't
around.
agree more with Diana about the soft retaliation, the marginalization and snubbing. I think that's the much more challenging part of it. And so we really build it into the training for managers to be really aware. I think awareness of that is so key. But I think that's, I agree.
I agree. And in operationalizing, of course, you want to do the thing that fits with your workforce. So if you think of our workforce, many of the people who work for us, this is their first job. And we like that. That's what we want. You get your first job at Walmart, we give you some training, and then you move on. So because of that, we don't assume that they know that. Like if someone calls or contacts us to say, I have an issue, I want to raise a concern, as part of that conversation, we say to them, and retaliation, we thank you for telling us. We have an anti-retaliation policy. If you feel any retaliation, please contact us. You might not need to say that in other settings, but we feel like we need to say that right up front.
Yeah, one of the best things that I've heard someone do, and we're not doing it, I think it's an opportunity for improvement, is they actually contact hotline callers afterwards to follow up with them and ask them if they're experiencing retaliation. I think that's fabulous.
We have a process, actually, it's built into our process to call the reporter, 30 days after the case is closed, 30 days after, 60 day, 90 day, and then we say, do we have to do it anymore? But it's built into the process to follow up after closure of the case with the reporter to ensure they don't experience any adverse actions and even the subtle forms of snubbing and marginalization.
That's great.
Well, great. Well, we're just out of time, and I think we met our objectives of being interesting, thought-provoking, and lively. Thanks again for the game, Kim. So thank
That
you
was
very
great.
much.
All right, thank you.